1. Opening hook. When gear fails, pockets decide life. When everything burned, broke, or disappeared, what actually kept men alive? Not the backpack, not the kit, not the expensive gear laid out neatly on a table. In the last 100 years, survival has been sold to us as a shopping list. Titanium tools, 30 functions folded into one shiny object. Preparedness measured by how much money you can spend and how many features you can carry. But history tells a far colder story. In World War II, men didn't survive because they were well equipped. They survived because when chaos erased plans, when vehicles burned, when packs were lost, there was still something they could reach without thinking. Picture the mud of Normandy, swallowing boots and equipment alike. The Ardennes in winter, where metal froze to skin and fingers stopped obeying commands. North Africa, where heat destroyed mechanisms before bullets ever could. The Pacific, where humidity rotted gear from the inside out. In those places, survival was not decided by what a man carried on his back. It was decided by what he carried on his body, what lived in his pockets, what could be reached in the dark, with shaking hands, under stress, pain, and exhaustion. This is the truth modern survival culture doesn't like to confront. Survival was never about having more, it was about having less, and knowing exactly how to use it. That forgotten logic has a name. It's called the pocket core. Not an object, not a gadget, but a way of thinking that quietly kept millions alive when everything else failed. Second, World War II shattered the romance of gear. World War II destroyed the romantic idea of equipment faster than any marketing campaign ever could. Before the war, military planning imagined orderly supply lines, intact units, and dependable gear. Combat erased that illusion almost immediately. Packs were lost in explosions, vehicles burned in minutes. Paratroopers landed miles from their targets with nothing but what they were wearing. Entire plans collapsed in seconds. When that happened, pockets stopped being storage. They became life insurance. Anything carried there had to earn its place. Not through clever design, not through novelty, but through brutal necessity. Weight mattered. Durability mattered. Failure meant injury or death. Soldiers didn't care if a tool could perform 20 tasks poorly. They needed it to do one or two things perfectly every single time. This is where modern thinking breaks down. Today we admire tools that look impressive under calm conditions, but World War II infantry didn't trust anything that demanded fine motor skills, delicate adjustments, or careful handling. They trusted tools that tolerated abuse, tools that could be dropped, pried with, struck, frozen, soaked, and still function. History filtered gear the way nature filters species. Anything fragile disappeared. Anything complicated failed. Anything that couldn't be used with numb fingers was discarded by reality itself. Across nations, climates, and theaters of war, the same pattern emerged. Simple tools survived because simple tools could be trusted. This ruthless efficiency gave birth to something far more important than any individual piece of equipment. It created the idea of a core, an irreducible minimum, a survival capability that could not be taken away easily. And that core lived in the pocket. Third, defining the pocket core, not a kit, a system. To understand the pocket core, you have to unlearn how modern preparedness is marketed. The pocket core is not a kit, it is not a loadout, and it is not a display of identity. It is a system defined by 3 historical requirements. First, immediate access. A pocket core tool must be reachable instantly, without thought, without unpacking, without light. Second, independent function. Each tool must stand alone, able to perform its job without relying on another mechanism to work. And third, no cascading failure. If one tool breaks, the others must remain fully usable. This is where World War II tools and modern multi-tools part ways. A multi-tool promises everything in one place, but history teaches us that integration creates vulnerability. Hinges jam, springs snap, nested tools become useless when a single part fails. Under stress, complexity becomes the enemy. World War II engineers understood this instinctively. They didn't ask, "What else can this tool do?" They asked a far more important question. How did it fail last time? That question shaped everything. Corners were rounded, tips were thickened, designs were simplified again and again until what remained could survive dirt, blood, sand, and cold. The result was not elegance, it was reliability. The pocket core was never meant to look impressive, it was meant to work when nothing else did. And once you understand that, the tools themselves begin to make sense. Not as gadgets, but as physical extensions of human capability. In the next part, we'll examine those tools one by one, starting with the most misunderstood of all, the blade. 4. The blade. A working edge, not a weapon. When people imagine a soldier's knife, they often picture something dramatic. A combat blade, a symbol of violence, something designed to intimidate. But that image belongs more to movies than to history. In World War II, the knife was not a weapon first. It was a tool, and it looked like one. There was nothing fantasy about it, nothing tactical, no serrated gimmicks, no oversized guards, no obsession with appearance. The blade a soldier carried existed for work, not for show. It cut rope and opened rations. It shaped wood for stakes and shelters. It scraped grime from equipment, trimmed bandages, and dug shallow fighting positions when nothing else was available. And perhaps most importantly, it was never treated as precious. A World War II blade was sharpened often, dulled often, and abused daily. It was pried with, struck against hard material, dropped in mud and snow. Soldiers didn't fear damaging it, because a tool that couldn't survive damage had no place in a pocket that might decide life or death. If you examine original knives from the era, they tell this story without words. Edges worn smooth, corners rounded, tips thickened through redesign and use. These were not flaws, they were evidence. Evidence of tools shaped by reality, not aesthetics. The blade was not meant to impress anyone. It was meant to interface directly with the physical world. Wood, fiber, metal, flesh, fabric. It was the point where human intent met material resistance. That is the lesson modern America often forgets. A knife is not an accessory. It is not content for a photograph. It is a working edge meant to solve real problems under imperfect conditions. And if it cannot do that, it does not belong in your pocket. 5th, the screwdriver, the most underrated survival tool. If the blade was the most misunderstood tool of World War II, the screwdriver was the most underestimated. It lacked drama, it lacked symbolism, and yet it may have been one of the most important survival tools a soldier carried. Sometimes it was a stand-alone tool, sometimes improvised, sometimes integrated into a buckle or field repair kit. But its purpose was always the same: mechanical survival. Rifles needed adjustment. Crates had to be pried open. Vehicles needed coaxing to move one more mile. Wire had to be twisted, bent, or cut free. None of these problems were solved by clever features. They were solved by leverage. A screwdriver was not just for turning screws. It was torque, applied through steel. It was a lever when strength mattered more than finesse. It became a chisel, a scraper, a pry bar, whatever the moment demanded. And it worked because it did not require precision. In freezing conditions, when fingers went numb and fine motor skills vanished, a screwdriver could still be used. You could strike it, lean on it, twist it with your entire arm if necessary. It tolerated dirt, blood, sand, and misuse. It did not care about alignment or delicacy. Compare that to modern bit drivers, fold-out tools, and miniature accessories. They promise convenience, but demand conditions that rarely exist under stress. They require careful positioning, steady hands, and mechanisms that remain clean and unobstructed. World War II taught a harsher truth. Most failures are mechanical, and mechanical problems are not solved with features. They are solved with leverage. That lesson is as relevant in modern America as it was on the battlefields of Europe. Sixth, separation over integration. Why multi-tools fail. Modern survival culture often chases a single solution. One tool to do everything. One object to eliminate the need for all others. On paper, it sounds efficient. In reality, it creates a dangerous illusion. World War II soldiers did not trust that idea. They understood something fundamental about systems under stress. Separation creates resilience. A blade did blade work. A screwdriver handled torque. Each tool was independent. If one failed, the others remained functional. There was no cascading failure. No single mechanical betrayal that disabled the entire system. Multi-tools collapse this separation. A broken hinge can render every function useless. A jammed mechanism can turn a dozen features into dead weight. And under stress, that complexity becomes a liability. The human body itself enforces this reality. Stress destroys dexterity. Cold stiffens joints. Fatigue slows coordination. In those moments, fine motor skills disappear. What remains is gross movement, strength, leverage, simplicity. World War II tools were built for that reality. They survived mud, sand, blood, and impact because they had to. Anything that required careful handling was quietly removed from pockets and replaced with something that could endure abuse. Modern tools often fail, not because they are poorly made, but because they are made for the wrong conditions. They assume calm hands, good light, and time to think. History offers no such luxuries. The pocket core survived because it respected separation over integration. It accepted limitation in exchange for reliability. And that trade, tested in the harshest environments imaginable, remains undefeated. 7. Skill beats steel, the hidden advantage of World War II soldiers. There is a truth hidden beneath every piece of equipment we've discussed so far. A truth more important than steel, sharper than any blade, and far more difficult to replace. The tools did not make World War II soldiers resourceful. Their skills did. Many of the men who fought in that war did not grow up surrounded by convenience. They were farmers, mechanics, carpenters, laborers. They worked with their hands long before they ever held a rifle. They understood leverage because they had lifted stubborn objects that refused to move. They understood grain because wood had split the wrong way more than once. They understood tension because things snapped when pushed too far. To them, a tool was never just a tool. A screwdriver was not a screwdriver. It was a lever when force was needed, a wedge when separation mattered, a scoring edge when precision could be sacrificed for speed. A knife was not a knife. It was a splitter, a scraper, a cutter, a shaper, depending on the problem in front of them. This familiarity changed everything. One tool became many solutions, not because the tool had multiple features, but because the mind behind it could see options instead of obstacles. This is the advantage modern culture has quietly lost. Today we replace instead of repair. We buy instead of practice. When something breaks, we reach for a credit card instead of understanding why it failed. Over time, that erodes confidence. It teaches dependence on objects rather than mastery of skills. World War II demanded the opposite. Scarcity forced competence. Failure taught lessons quickly, and those lessons followed soldiers long after the war ended. The pocket core worked because it was paired with hands that knew what to do when nothing went according to plan. 8. Applying the pocket core today without cosplay. So how does this translate to modern America without turning survival into costume or nostalgia? It begins with subtraction. Strip your everyday carry down to what actually works. Not what looks clever, not what advertises preparedness, but what mirrors the logic that history has already tested. At the center is a robust locking knife. Not oversized, not decorative, but long enough to work. 3 to 4 inches of blade with a thick spine that can tolerate pressure and abuse. This is not a collector's item. It is your primary interface with the physical world. Alongside it, carry a separate flathead screwdriver. Not a bit, not a folding attachment. A solid piece of steel that can apply real torque. This single tool replaces an absurd number of fragile accessories and solves problems most people don't anticipate until it's too late. If you choose to expand, add real pliers. Not micro-sized, but something you can grip with gloves on. Something that can cut wire, hold fast, and survive strain. Notice what is deliberately absent. No bottle openers, no 20-function compromises, no features designed to impress rather than endure. But tools alone are not enough. Skills must follow. Use your knife to make feather sticks instead of watching someone else do it. Take your screwdriver and disassemble the equipment you rely on, then put it back together. Practice fixing things rather than replacing them. This is how a simple pocket core becomes a survival multiplier, not through ownership, but through familiarity. 9th, the psychology of preparedness. At its heart, the pocket core is not a hardware lesson, it is a psychological one. World War II taught a principle that modern culture resists. Preparedness isn't about owning more, it's about needing less. It's about seeing possibility where others see limitation. 1 tool, 5 solutions. That mindset kept men alive when resupply failed and plans collapsed. Modern survival culture often sells comfort through accumulation. More gear means more security, or so we are told. But history shows the opposite. Real survival comes from prioritization, from knowing what matters when everything else is stripped away. This is why the most important step is an audit, not of your budget, but of your thinking. Ask yourself hard questions. Would this tool still function after a week in mud? Would I trust it with shaking hands in failing light? Does it exist because it truly works, or because it looks clever when laid out on a table? The pocket core forces honesty. It removes the illusion of safety and replaces it with something far more reliable. Understanding, capability, confidence earned through use. And that is why this lesson still matters today. History isn't meant to be collected or admired from a distance. It's meant to sharpen how we think, how we prepare, and how we survive. 10. Final close. Pockets still decide survival. When plans collapse, when resupply fails, and when everything you thought you could rely on disappears, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. Survival does not belong to the biggest kit, the newest gadget, or the most expensive tool. It belongs to what you can reach without thinking, what you know how to use when fear shortens your breath and stress steals your fine motor skills, what remains when comfort vanishes and reality takes over. This is why the pocket core is not outdated, it is not primitive, and it is certainly not nostalgic. It is rooted in physics, in psychology, and in logic that has already been tested under the harshest conditions imaginable. Physics teaches us that leverage beats complexity. Psychology teaches us that simplicity survives stress. History proves that tools endure only when paired with skill and restraint. World War II did not reward abundance. It rewarded clarity. It rewarded men who understood that fewer tools, chosen wisely and mastered deeply, were worth more than any collection of clever features. The pocket core was never about gear. It was about judgment, about knowing what mattered when everything else was stripped away. That lesson still applies today. In a world obsessed with accumulation, history offers a quieter, sharper truth. Preparedness is not built by owning more. It is built by understanding more, practicing more, and trusting less in objects and more in ourselves. So audit your pockets, audit your habits, and ask the questions history already answered for us. Would this work when conditions are ugly? Would I trust it when my hands are shaking? Do I own this because it performs or because it impresses? Because history isn't meant to be collected. It isn't meant to sit on a shelf or hang on a wall. It's meant to sharpen how we think, how we prepare, and how we survive.